And over to the temperature gauge. Now I've not moved the resistance, so I'm going for the temperature gauge for full scale deflection. As we can see, the fuel gauge is still actually going down as it cools down. So there we go. 100 degrees or terminal in case of an amp is full scale. That's at 22 ohms. If I then take it back to 60 ohms, I'm just going to give it a bit of assistance. You can see we're getting roughly to the same as we had with the fuel gauge. Now, these gauges should have fixed places on the gauge for different resistances, which is why I use this box. I would have a table, I would set the resistances, and then if you look very, very closely inside the gauge, there's like one little rivet pivot point, one that can move, and a tiny little slot. Now that tiny little slot you can get to with a screwdriver by poking the cork out in these holes, and you can actually bend that strip, which is what you do to calibrate the gauge. It is mechanical, so that is a mechanical fix. And if we then go up to 100 ohms, we're back down mapping with the fuel gauge. Now what I'm going to do is, now that we've seen that the fuel gauge behaves the same as the temperature gauge, I'm going to show you a very, very easy way to test your gauge in the car with something that you probably have lying about, because you're not going to have one of these. So just give me one moment and I'll set that up. Okay, this has wired the new device in place, and as I said, it's something you're likely to have lying about, and that's actually a spare fuel sender. Old, new, even if the winding in the middle is a little bit broken, if you look through you can actually see the same principle where you've got loads and loads of winding. There's a resistance wire in there and there's a wiper arm goes up and down. So if you watch, the temperature gauge has done exactly the same as the fuel gauge. If I move the lever halfway up till full, we will see the temperature rise and stop. So there you go. Take it, move it around a bit more. Move it all the way. So, cheap and cheerful test instrument for your temperature gauge is to retask your fuel sender. In fact, if you can get to the back of the binnacle dash, easy enough, you can actually swap the two wires around, and your needle should be in the same place as it is for your fuel gauge. They are actually interchangeable. Now, one of the things that not a lot of people appreciate is the amount of current this draws. So that's just for one instrument, and it can peak at 200 milliamps, so both your gauges will probably hover between 350 milliamps when it's running, which is a significant enough current. So let's go and apply this quick fix to an actual car. Now this is actually testing on a car, and one of the things that's really important to do before we do this is we need to do it with the ignition on. So pop the positive off the coil, because if the points are closed, this is going to cook its nuts off. for the time it might take you to do this. Now here we have, this is the wire of my sender. This has been fitted later, as this car never actually had a temperature gauge. The arm for the fuel sender is all the way down, case to earth, terminal directly on. So let's go in, turn the ignition on. Now this has a separate gauge, but it's the same for the built-in gauge. So there we go. Nothing. Let's go all the way. You should see that gauge all the way at the top. Take this back to roughly halfway. And our gauge is back down to somewhere sensible, slowly cooling down and slowly climbing down. Back up a bit more. Slowly creeping up. So there we go, that's the cheapest and cheerful check. And as I said, if you use one of these old senders, you can even bend the lever round so that it points up here. And you can actually have marked positions for low, mid, high, and just turn it around and check any of your gauges anytime you want.